Happy Halloween, everybody. I have been cursed with becoming a pumpkin today. Don't ask, it was a long story. I wish I could at least look good, but my friend who draws for me wanted to unionize, and I just couldn't have that.
Inferno, don't leave me here. Inferno, you haven't been paying me yet.
Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. Sometimes it's Christmas, but more often than not, however, I lean more towards Halloween. The reasoning for that is because of what is associated with it. Horror. Horror is probably my favorite genre overall. I grew up loving horror movies like Halloween 6 with creepy Paul Rudd, Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan. Those ones are just funny, don't worry, I know I have bad taste. Scream, however, is peak, and the franchise itself peaked with this film and just kept getting worse.
Did you really call the police?
You're sorry, ass.
My mom and dad are gonna be so mad.
This love for horror didn't just stop at film, it even extended to games as well. And then it stopped. Horror in video games, it's quite beautiful, I'd say. Horror games for me are essentially this quote from one of my previous videos. On top of that, gaming is capable of being the greatest thing you've ever experienced, or the funniest thing, and it's amazing. But 10 times funnier if bad. I love horror games, but not even just that, but just the usage of horror in games in general, because yes, there are games that have some of that good old horror in them when they aren't even that. But not even just that, things that are just terrifying, even if not intended to be. So let me just talk about it. First, what are you afraid of? Spiders? Heh, little bitch. The unknown? This is a common fear I'm sure many of us have. Why do I say that? Because I professionally talk out of my ass. Now that we have that established, what makes a horror game good? Well, first we deunionized the studio alongside mass layoffs so I can finance another car. For me, what I'd say makes a good horror game comes down to quite a few factors, but I'm gonna condense them to mainly just 4 points. First, the story, while can be basic, I feel needs to be there and present enough to where we, the player, understand what is happening. Which sounds like common sense, but I know 2 specific games that fail at this, and yet somehow they were rewarded for being ass. Of course, it doesn't need to be directly telling you what is happening. You can get it from environmental storytelling, or just some subtle nods at what's going on in the story. And of course, they can leave stuff up for interpretation, like an ending or what a point of certain characters are. But overall, you still need to have a basic understanding of what's going on. At least a little bit, I think. Next, the gameplay has to be engaging. May not have to be completely revolutionary, but if the gameplay is good and keeps the player engaged, then it makes the game even better and gives the player a reason to keep playing. Because, let's face it, would you really want to sit through a game that doesn't have good mechanics? What if the movement is clunky in a way that doesn't feel right, as if you're controlling a boat instead of a person, where it has no real purpose and just makes moving around frustrating? What if the combat is just straight up unfun garbage, like smacking a guy and taking a step back as a form of attacking? Maybe the puzzles are either so easy that they would be used in lessons in kindergarten, or never explained and just utterly confusing, to where you look up a guide and go mentally insane trying to find out how this dude figured it out, and you didn't. Or in my opinion, what is one of the biggest things that is kind of just a constant in horror games: stealth. Does it have enough depth? Are the enemy AIs smart enough to make it challenging while adding tension in the moment? Of course, it doesn't need all of this, but whether the main gameplay focus is puzzles, combat, stealth, whatever else, my point here is that it needs to be good. It needs to be competent. It needs to be well designed. The whole game needs to be competent for that matter. But if the game focuses on, say, stealth and has no combat, make sure it's good and doesn't get repetitive. And the same thing can be said about combat and puzzles and whatever else is in there. Next, it's the atmosphere. This can be music from the menu to the save room to a random hallway. The look of the game. Does it convey the eeriness or uneasiness that of a horror game should strive to inflict on a player? Like the Spencer Mansion, Silent Hill in its entirety. I don't know, I only played 3, what am I talking about? Hell, what about the USG Ishimura? Even just the sounds of other things in the area you're exploring. Crows making loud caws, crickets chirping, rain hitting the roof of a house, even something like a fan in an office. Yes, seriously. Anything to make the place feel real in a sense. Fully realizing the world that you are in. Even if it's in the future or something that is just completely unrealistic, can still feel real or immersive, you could say. Making you feel like you're a part of this, which would elevate the fear factor in this game tenfold, at least. Which I guess could be part of this point, as I feel a good horror game can also immerse you in its world and story. On top of that, you have visual storytelling and environmental storytelling. God, I love that shit so much. It's always usually really subtle, but when you catch it, it is really good. Not only that, but it can also tie into what I mentioned in the beginning, fear of the unknown. The music, sounds, look, and style of a game I feel can just convey this eeriness when done well and inflicting fear in the player. Having you walk around each corner not knowing what you might find, or hey, take the original Resident Evil with opening doors. Was it a replacement for loading screens? Sure, but there was suspense with each door you opened, making you feel like you shouldn't even go into another room to save yourself from what was lurking behind it. Now this next point may fall under the gameplay point I made earlier, but the threat. This is easily one of the most important things to get down in my opinion. Who should we be afraid of? Sure, we can have many different enemies, but should we fear them? Sure, the zombies in Resident Evil aren't all that, but play your cards wrong and they overpower you pretty easily. Unless you play unassisted like I did once. Don't play unassisted. Stalker enemies are some of my favorite because they are the most threatening when done well. As I said, zombies can easily overpower you if you are a moron, but can they follow you and learn every move that you make like a xenomorph? Sure, they might be able to follow you, but they sure as hell ain't quick enough to make me scared anymore. The Xenomorph from Alien Isolation, Mr. X from the RE2 remake, that creature from Amnesia the Bunker. I am genuinely afraid of this game. Chris Walker, look at him. What a silly guy. The Nightmare from Prey. And we can't forget the OG, Slender Man. We need to be able to respect the enemies in these games far more than in any other game. Don't take this as a criticism, but in Doom I have no respect for anything. Except for Doom 3 sometimes. The Hell Knights, or the boss enemies, like the other Doom games, yeah, I would say I have enough reason to fear them and respect them. The regular zombies though, nah. The most important way to build up respect, or fear for the enemy is an introduction. The Xenomorph in Alien Isolation, which feels as close to the original movies in a way that feels, well, awesome, yet terrifying because holy fuck, giant alien. Then there's the Resident Evil 2 remake with Mr. X. Sure, it's a remake and there was cut content. We were all expecting to see him at some point, but how he was handled in this game and how they introduced him will always be one of the most memorable moments in a horror game for me, not just in the Resident Evil series. Now I will acknowledge that from what I've been told, there is stuff like scenes and other content removed in the remake. But as someone who's never really played the original, I can't really speak on that much, but it is something important to know. That said, I love Mr. X's inclusion. He is just a hulking beast of a creature with his extremely loud footsteps. There is never a moment from here on out that you won't be hearing him. You can of course stun him and whatnot, but when he goes down, it's not for long, usually for a second or two, nothing more. It's even more frightening when you sit in a save room, areas meant to be protection, where you can have a moment of peace, and yet it feels like you are never truly safe. You know, Mr. X reminds me of someone from work. Loud footsteps, somewhat tall, they follow me around. Yeah, you know who you are if you're watching this. I don't like you. Then there is the Nightmare, which I would say is arguably more terrifying than either of these guys. I believe, from what I remember, he appears for the first time when you access the Arboretum for the first time. But man, the reaction I had when I played this game for the first time all those years ago, seeing that objective pop up saying the nightmare is hunting you, what the fuck is a nightmare? Why am I being timed? What is happening? And he is, again, just a hulking beast, unlike Mr. X. He is a less frequent of an enemy. Sure, Mr. X is always hunting you from here on out, but in Prey, he's really only hunting you at certain times, so it makes his appearances maybe a bit more impactful than, say, Mr. X. That's not a diss on Mr. X, though, because I think he is still an impactful enemy. Now, Prey is an immersive sim first and foremost, with multiple ways you could approach each and every situation, and it's no different with the Nightmare. However, there's only really two options here. Option number one, hide from the nightmare. You'll be able to save your resources, and once he leaves, you will have a breathing room for about 20 minutes before he strikes again. Option number two, killing him, which is a much riskier move and is usually not even worth it because he has so much health, and killing him gives you only 30 minutes instead of 20. Depending on the difficulty you are playing, it might be a better option to just die mid-fight to change up your plan. Now, of course, all these points I listed here aren't completely necessary, at least altogether. Like, I don't think a horror game is automatically bad if it can't dox me the moment it smells my sweat. I guess it's just me being pretentious and picking out parts of games that I think are pretty good. Resident Evil 4 isn't exactly what I'd say is a bone-chilling experience, at least not for the most part. If anything, it is cheesy as all hell and most certainly entertaining. Sure, there's a few moments where I'd say I was terrified. The only noticeable moment of this for me is like when you meet the regenerators. But the moment I saw that ass jiggle in the remake, I lost all fear. Wait, what was I talking about? Point being is those are just aspects that I think, if done well, will make it in fact a good game. But I don't think a game is legally required to have these, but I think if you are going to focus on any one or two of these factors, make sure that they are done well, or don't, and it might still end up being entertaining. And I say this because if every game did follow this format and did exactly what I said, word for word, bar for bar, it would get pretty stale, there would be no variety. And I want to make an example here, just to further this point. The difference between Resident Evil 1, 4, and 7 all are beginnings of each individual era in the franchise. Resident Evil 1 would be the fixed camera angle era, 4 would be the start of the action horror era, and 7 would be the first person shooter era. These are the names that I'm giving them. I don't know what they're called by the community. And again, all beginnings of each era in the franchise being so distinct from one another, yet achieving what they were going for and possibly more. Resident Evil 1 was a more claustrophobic game with its fixed camera angle. While you may not like it, and sure, we can argue how it's dated game design or whatever. For me, however, it adds to this feeling of being trapped within the hallways of the Spencer Mansion. Resident Evil 4, both the original and remake, are cheese. They go for a more action horror approach, and while yeah, not nearly as scary as I'd say 1 and 7 can be, it will remind you to keep your guard up when it wants to. And Resident Evil 7, at least in the Baker house itself, it felt closer to what was good about RE1, except this time in first person. However, I will say it doesn't feel as claustrophobic, but apparently it was too scary, so Capcom decided to make Village the least scary game in the franchise. It's a good experience overall. The atmosphere is good, everything about it is good, really. The point I'm trying to make here is while all three are striving to be a horror game, they achieve that in different ways, taking different mechanics, doing different things. And there are many more good horror games that achieve being, good in different ways. Silent Hill 2, a game I only played 20 minutes of. Dead Space and its beautiful remake. Little Nightmares 1 and 2 are amazing in my opinion, because you just feel so small. I mean, yeah, you are small, but shut up. Condemned Criminal Origins was horrifying to me because it just felt so grounded in reality. Then there is Fear, a game I will not be speaking about as much because I plan to cover this franchise very soon. But what about Manhunt, the stealth horror game series by Rockstar Games? Yeah, it feels dated to play these days, but both games have a good visual style, killer atmosphere, some really good gameplay mechanics, mostly the ones that put audio to use. I heard that the original versions, if you had a microphone, you could lure enemies that way. I kinda wish that worked on the port to modern hardware. Nightmare of Decay is a game that I talked about 2 years ago, one of the earliest attempts of me trying to make a game review, and genuinely I still love this game. It is a love letter to all those who fell in love with the original Resident Evil games. Its graphic style reminiscent of those PS1 and PS2 horror games, with a first-person perspective, making it feel like a slower-paced RE7. It's a game I recommend, only $5 on Steam, but there is a demo if you are skeptical, despite the game only taking about 3 hours to beat. Until Dawn is a solid horror experience. While it doesn't have much in terms of gameplay, it makes up for it with its atmosphere, story, keeping the player on edge and intrigued with wanting to know what happens next. It's essentially an interactive slasher film. You also have games by Puppet Combo and Chilla's Art. Puppet Combo is a one-man show from what I know, and Chilla's Art is two brothers. They both make horror games, which are relatively short, but they have great atmosphere. My favorite from Puppet Combo is either Night Watch or Murder House. They feel like slasher films like Halloween or Friday the 13th from the 80s. And for Chilla's Arts games, my favorite's gotta be Convenience Store and Closing Shift. They were just the most uncomfortable to play. The scariest game I've ever played till this very day has and probably will forever be PT. One of the most memorable moments in gaming for me. I was about 8 or 9 when I played it. I was at my nana's house and my uncle put it on his PS4 and had me play it. I wasn't on the internet like that. You know how Young Thug said James Harden don't got internet? Yeah, that was me. So this game's existence was just confusing to me. I didn't know what PT was. I didn't even know what a Silent Hill looked like. And yet here I was walking around the hallway for what felt like an eternity, feeling nothing but dread. The noises from the lamp moving, the wailing of what sounded like a woman at points and then sometimes a baby, the news on the radio detailing a guy murdering his family, the lack of any actual background noise or music or anything for the most part, the sounds of your own footstep as you walked through the hall, the fetus. It was terrifying. That jump scare still lives in my head rent-free. Now, I don't find jump scares to be all that scary. I blame that on growing up with games like Five Nights at Freddy's and with other games chasing its success, or at least trying to and failing. It really watered them down. But for PT, there was build-up. You went through this looping hall expecting something, and when it eventually happens, like, yeah, it shouldn't be surprising, but it still got you. At least that's how I see it. But that's kind of the beauty of horror games, ain't it? All these different games that you can find, each one feeling different than the last. Sure, that can be said about games in general, however, at least for me, when a horror game is good, it feels special. Some of the best visual and elemental storytelling and atmosphere comes out of horror in my opinion. Like take BioShock for example. Everything about this game is amazing and terrifying, but the look of Rapture, or the tower in the opening of the game with the statue of Andrew Ryan above the banner, saying no gods or kings, only man, which I'd say is a good bit of insight on who Andrew Ryan as a person is. Dead Space is another easy one. Obviously, when you get your first weapon, the literal tutorial is written on the wall in blood. On top of that, you even have some really neat characters and stories in the genre, whether hilariously stupid but fun, or genuinely tragic. Sometimes in between. The horror genre isn't one type of game, it just kind of invades other genres. Point and click, we got it. FPS, we got it. The Polar Express for PS2, we got it. It doesn't even remain to just single player games either. Multiplayer horror games. There isn't a lot of them, at least from what I know. The three that come to mind for me, Dead by Daylight, a game I despise more than Need for Speed Rivals, and nobody is ready for that conversation with me if they thought I was unfair with Rivals. Phasmophobia, a game I've never played, and Lethal Company, the game that outsold Call of Duty. The proximity chat is either hilarious or horrifying when you call out to your friends to not even get a response as the reality of your situation sets in, realizing you are alone. Also, what I said about invading other genres, yeah, no, there is actually games that aren't even horror games that still have these kinds of moments and elements in them. Mafia 3, while the main game I find to be extremely disappointing, the Sign of the Times DLC is genuinely good. Gameplay-wise, story-wise, just everything. Has a pretty good atmosphere in those specific areas you need to go to. Plus, I love when games tackle cultic stuff. It's just so cool to me.
Arrival of the blessed.
And now, our anointment.
May your line increase.
Dishonored has some creepy moments like Granny Rags. That's just about it. I only felt like mentioning Dishonored because it's goated. Halo, that's a franchise, I think. Does Microsoft know that? 343 Guilty Spark is a downright terrifying mission. The Flood's mere existence is a horror in itself. That's stuff you've already heard before, I'm sure. But for me, one of the other scarier moments in Halo is the mission Mombasa Streets in Halo 3 ODST. The atmosphere in this level is just so unsettling to me, the music being strange, and you don't really fight that many enemies. There's no dialogue except for, the ones from the enemies. For the most part, you are really just by yourself. Max's nightmares from Max Payne were always strange and creepy to me. Makes sense since it was a nightmare after all, but I thought I'd briefly mention that one too. And of course, how could we forget Minecraft caves? 11-year-old me was always petrified. The sounds, the mobs, everything was horrifying to me. But then I grew up. Horror has been my favorite genre for the longest time, and I'd like to say it started with PT. Do I have PTSD from that game? Absolutely, that's why I love it. I love all kinds of games, of course, but the feeling when you are playing a good horror game that does everything very well, it's unmatched. But then there is the bad horror games. I don't want to waste too much time on this segment though, because most of these games are a waste of time either playing or talking about them. The worst horror games I've ever played all fall under the subgenre of mascot horror, and if you don't know what that is, good. You are most likely too old to know what that is, and I wish I was you. Hello Neighbor. 2 games with this pedo Buzz Lightyear looking ass. Neither of them are good. I was like 12 when the first alpha came out, and genuinely each and every alpha ended up being better in gameplay and level design from the full release. Physics are terrible, story's terrible, if you can even call it a story. I am genuinely under the belief that there isn't even an actual story. People just gaslit themselves into thinking there was one because of a silent film cutscene. The Neighbor AI is genuinely embarrassing in the full release. In both games, it's embarrassing. The way they could just break and make it basically a game with no threat to deal with is hilarious, honestly, because these are games that, when they first came out, hyped up the fact that they had a learning AI. And yeah, he does learn, but I think he was held back every single year. Hello Neighbor 2, the more I think about it, is disgraceful because I actually liked that initial alpha Hello guest, and the fact that this dude is in the first cutscene and that's it, what was the point? I could do a full video breaking down both these games and talking about how terrible these games are. Will I? Let this video do well, then maybe. Bending the Ink Machine, the most disappointing one out of these games I am listing here. Because I think this series had potential, but it will forever go untapped. 2 years ago, I made a review on the game. Sure, the video is kind of ass. I'm kind of impressed with how effortlessly I was able to make a video from 2022 seem dated. But the combat sucks ass. Smack a guy once, then back up, rinse and repeat. Stealth, if you can even call it that, is just hide in a locker and the enemies fuck right off. The story makes no sense, but I can't even sit here and pretend it's the game's biggest issue when the actual horror and atmosphere that the first and debatably second chapter set up is dissolved by the start of the third chapter and becomes Fetch Quest Simulator. The sequel, Dark Revival, improves upon things like a better story that is easier to keep up with and makes sense. There is more of a horror feeling to the game consistently throughout. It's not a lot, in fact it's not much better, but it's spread out more throughout the game rather than have it all in the first 2 chapters. I do like these abilities that you get in the game. The boss fights are better too, but the combat still sucks. The stealth is still the same. The Ink Demon is arguably a more annoying feature in this game than it was in the first game. I'm not really fearing him, I'm more so inconvenienced by him. And yeah, I never even really originally gave this guy credit in the first game because honestly, he didn't even do that great, he's just worse in this game. But don't get me wrong, the Dark Revival is better, but it goes from a 3 out of 10 to like a 5 or a 6. In my initial video on the game, I put in the description that it was like a 7, but I replayed it for a little bit and thought about it more. I don't even want to hate this series. I want it to be good. I just don't see it being that good. Then there is Garden of Banban. I'm not going to criticize this game. You can look at one frame from a video about this game and you get the full picture. In fact, I'm going to criticize the fact that the community let this unfunny joke go on way longer than it should have. Maybe I'm being a contrarian, but this game stopped being funny midway through the third game. Maybe I'm just mad that that video didn't do well, but mostly it's just unfunny. Like, it's the same joke repeated over and over. Sure, it was funny for the first game and some of the second, but there's no way you found any game after, even the third one, funny. I don't care if Choo Choo Charles was there. Back to the positivity, I love horror. Yeah, it's beautiful, but you didn't need me to waste your time yapping about it. So here's a bunch of random people you never met yapping about it too. I went to my friends and asked them what their favorite moment in a horror game was, and these were the answers I got. So let's go and see what they had to say.
One of the scariest moments I had while playing a horror game was when I was playing Until Dawn while I was about 11 or 10. Basically, I believe it was the scene where I made the choice to investigate the voice, which sounds like Jessica, and you're playing as Ashley. But instead, you kind of fuck up and end up getting her killed. And it legitimately shocked me a little bit because I wasn't expecting that. I was full on expecting to see Jessica, but instead you open that trap door and it's the Wendigo.
Okay, so one thing that really scared me, like, about a video game was, the Pokemon Lavender Town soundtrack. Like, oh my god. It was just, like, how creepy it sounded. Like, how monotone and just, like, eerie. Yeah, the conspiracy theories, the creepypastas behind this one song. Like, it just scared me as a child. It scares me now. I mean, well, probably not now, but, it was just pretty scary. It's really the only thing I can think of.
Scariest moment that I've had while playing a video game was probably when I was around 5 or 6 or something like that, like around there, and I went out of my basement, and my dad was playing Doom 3 on his computer, and I was just watching it for a little bit. I'm pretty sure that he was at right at the beginning of the game. And he was like hiding in this vent and looking over this like room with a bunch of guys working or something like that, and then just randomly this huge skull just came through the door and like transformed everyone into like zombies or some shit, bro. And I remember as a little kid, bro, that shit freaked me out so bad. I remember I definitely had a couple nightmares about that shit, bro. I can't even lie, bro. But that, like, it was probably the scariest moment that I've had playing a game, or like, because it wasn't me playing, but like it was pretty much me playing, bro. It's like it was my dad. All right, so shut the fuck up. All right, so all right, yeah, no, it was too scary.
For me, it would have to be the Resident Evil VR game. I played this on the PlayStation VR, and I was playing the first section of it. Haven't played Resident Evil before. This is my first Resident Evil game, and then I get a jump scare like that comes out of nowhere, and with my ADHD ridden self, it scares the shit out of me. So yeah, that's the most scariest game I ever played.
So it was like probably like 3 a.m. or like somewhere in the morning. I was like playing Roblox or something on my computer. I heard a knock on my window. I was a little scared, but I just assumed it was like the wind. There was a bang that followed along with it. I got even more scared because it was a bang and not like a whole knock. I assumed it was like the bush outside my window. And then I was like, okay, this is not my bush. This is not the bush that's outside my house. It's literally just, this is literally a person. So I closed up the curtains, cause you know how like windows have like a reflection that it has like that's like reflecting what's in your room instead of like what's outside at night. So I couldn't even tell what it was. It sounded like a person. It sounded like a person banging at my window. I got really scared. And then I heard some jiggling on my handle. I wish it was the wind. No, it was literally a person. So I yelled out, "I have a fucking knife, get out of my house." It just went away. I think there was an attempt of breaking in. Yep, that was the scariest experience I've ever had while playing a video game.
Right, so, I'm here to speak about the one and only Nintendo nightmare, the submerged castle. So in Pikmin 2, there's caves which are sub-areas that take place away from the overworld of the game. It's where most of the game will take place, but there's one cave that's extremely noticeable in comparison to all the others. It's known as the submerged castle. It's tucked away, all the way away, in the back of the main area, the perplexing pool. This location already should set off major red flags for any player, as it's sitting pretty absolutely submerged in water. This is an issue because no other Pikmin types can enter this cave. They can't even grasp the idea of it. The only Pikmin you can bring here are blue Pikmin, which are notoriously being depicted in peril or danger in all Pikmin media. This would set off major alarms to any player that something is really wrong. And enough to tip you off that something was weird here. The game's background track surely will. The music matches nothing else in the game. It's eerie, haunting, and overall a complete contrast to the rest of this game's tone. Another weird note is an escape area on the first level of the cave. These are saved only for last floors or rest levels. Another punch to your gut is delivered when you hear the crackling of fire. Not just any fire, but a fiery Bulblax, an enemy of which you don't have any hope of beating without red Pikmin, not unless under specific circumstances. But wait, you only have blue Pikmin in this cave, so what can you do? Well, here's the trick. You gotta lead it to a pool of water before knocking its lights out. But why? Why is a simple enemy fight stretched into a whole puzzle now? Why is it even here if you can't fight it normally? It's almost like it's all to waste your time. It's almost as if something is purposely wasting your time. There it is. You meet what all the danger signs have been leading to. The Water Wraith. You can't hurt it, can't fight it. You can only run away from it as it pursues you with stone rollers that will flatten your Pikmin team in a millisecond, reducing them to nothing. I hope you got all the treasure on this floor, because if you didn't, you're either going to have to abandon it all, or collect it while being hunted. It'll chase you down every single level of the cave until you have nothing left but to face it yourself. On the last floor, you finally get access to another type of Pikmin, the purple Pikmin, from purple candy pop buds resting on this cave's final floor. With nothing else left to do, you walk into the ring and face the Wraith. It begins to hunt you, but out of curiosity, you throw one of your new purple Pikmin at it. You expect the same results, but much to your surprise, it cowers in fear. It hides its face. The invincible beast has a weakness now, so you use this and defeat it. Or you thought you did. As from the dust it runs around flailing around in fear of you. You are now the invincible creature. You're the one it's afraid of. This creature, for the first time, feels fear. It is a true wonder in the series, and it's a massive fan favorite, deservedly so. This little cave caused massive ripples throughout the series, with this submerged castle entirely returning in Pikmin 4 under the name Engulfed Castle. And in Pikmin 3, a Wraith becomes the final boss outright. It's known as the Plasma Wraith. Wraith comes from the legend of the Umibozu, which is a spirit from Japanese folklore that capsizes ships by causing severe weather conditions at sea. This legend also makes the Wraiths, the Water Wraith and Plasma Wraith respectively, way more important to the story of the game than anyone could tell from just a surface level. They connect due to the fact that in the legend of the Umibozu, the ships sink due to bad weather, and in the Pikmin games, Olimar's ship crashes onto PNF 404 due to strange space anomalies like meteors or just gravity, strange amounts of pull. And it's not just Olimar either. Every spaceship that enters PNF 404's atmosphere crashes. Every single one. The only ones that don't are the ones that have no chance of escaping on their own anyway. And if that information alone isn't damning enough, this one puts the nail in the coffin. The Water Wraith's name in Japan is Aimibuzu. Very close to Umibozu. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the submerged castle. I could go on and on and on and on about more details about this, but this is already pretty long, so see ya.
Wow, some really, really interesting responses we got ourselves here. And that's what it's all about. In the end, regardless of all the nonsense jargon I was yapping about in the beginning, I just love horror. The good, some of the bad, not you. And it's something I will always continue loving because, let's face it, there will always be a banger in there somewhere. And it's just beautiful. They are always the most interesting and fun games to talk about. Hopefully we can eventually see good mascot horror games. We had that one game by the Szymanski brothers, My Friendly Neighborhood I think it's called. No shock when you are related to this fucking guy. Yeah, David. I love you. The game might be better than Nightmare Decay, like genuinely it is really good. I don't want to say so much about it because I'd rather you go and play it yourself. So go do that. I'll link its Steam page in the description if you go and buy it. Okay, that's it. I'm done mentioning any more games, I promise. In the end, all that matters is if the game is enjoyable. I still wholeheartedly believe in those 4 points I talked about earlier, but you know, if a game is bad but funny, then that works too. Because, let's be real, there is some really funny games out there. But again, as I've said like 100 times already, when a horror game is done right, it's one of the most bone-chilling experiences ever. And I feel it's even more petrifying than any other form of horror media, like Poppy Playtime. This is where I end the video. Let me know what your favorite moment playing a scary game was. Hell, it doesn't even gotta be a horror game specifically. Like the video if you liked this video, or if you like Slenderman's gay cousin, I like Menderman. Subscribe for content. What kind of content? I don't know, could be good, could be mid. You'll find out. And if you enjoyed the video, good. Now goodbye.